All right. Well, a very good evening to you all. I am just delighted to be reunited with so many of our commissioners tonight. Thank you for making the time and coming out. Thank you to those of us who are joining us online. Welcome to our July 1st, 2021 meeting. We are beginning this meeting at 7:01 p.m. And I'd like to start by giving a very special welcome to our speakers, U.S. Representative Don Beyer, DASH General Manager and CEO Josh Baker, and DRPT Chief of Public Transportation Jen DeBrule. We are back to normal with a few modifications with our updated electronic participation policy, updated to reflect new opportunities afforded to us by the General Assembly. It's now easier for commissioners to participate virtually for specific reasons, so long as we have an in-person quorum. So thank you for being part of that in-person quorum. That means some of our colleagues are with us on the WebEx. So we now have commissioners participating virtually, which is a new improvement over last year or the year before. And it's also going to let our speakers participate virtually, which we appreciate them bearing with us as we adjust to this hybrid model. Commissioner Smedberg is participating electronically for this meeting for personal reasons, and Senator Bell is participating electronically for medical reasons. So those of you on the phone or WebEx, thank you for joining us. We'll ask that you stay muted throughout the conversation, except when you're speaking. And when you do, if you could do us a favor and speak up so that we can hear you. We'll continue to show the meeting slides on the TV screens to help us navigate. And this should also help our listening audience on YouTube Live. And with votes, we will be using a hybrid approach for that too. For those in the room, we'll go back to past practice, just do a voice vote, no more roll call votes finally, which is great. And then since we have just the three commissioners participating, or excuse me, just the two commissioners participating virtually, I'm going to ask them to confirm their votes after the secretaries recorded the vote in the room. Ms. Gilchrist has confirmed that we have quorum. So let's launch in. I trust everybody had a chance to take a look at the agenda. We're first going to begin by hearing from Representative Beyer. We'll have some time to chat with him, which I'm looking forward to. And then we'll follow that with a roundtable discussion about a topic that I think has really been bubbling up in everyone's jurisdiction, which is zero fare and reduced fare transit programs throughout the region. While the state of emergency declaration has expired, hence the back in-person meeting, NVTC is going to continue to receive written public comments. We find that's worked pretty well. And so, Kate, did we receive any written comments this month?
Madam Chair, we actually did not receive any written comments this month, but again, we'll continue that as we move forward.
So for the listening public, we'd love to hear from you, and you can do so without having to come join us in person. So we will launch right in. We are just so pleased to have Representative Beyer with us tonight. He is in his fourth term as representative from the 8th District, which includes Arlington County, the city of Alexandria, the city of Falls Church, and parts of Fairfax. I would argue the best congressional district in Northern Virginia, and I'm sure Representative Beyer would say the same. We're so glad that you could join us. This is obviously just an absolutely transformational congressional session when it comes to transit and transportation. And I wanted to begin by thanking you for your work on behalf of securing federal COVID relief funding. I think that's true for all of us in our jurisdictions in general, but it is especially true for transportation and the prioritization of WMATA in particular. And we really appreciate everything that you've been doing to support our economic recovery. I also today want to shout out that today the House passed the 5-year surface transportation reauthorization bill. That is, of course, really welcome news. That reflects a lot of our federal legislative priorities, I know as well as yours, and the reauthorization of federal funding for WMATA, deeply important to us. And we have been glad to follow and support the Invest in America proposal, which of course would offer record-breaking investments in passenger rail and public transit, not to mention multimodal options. And the bill includes member-designated project requests. So Congressman Beyer, you've been a champion for us, putting in member requests for $2 million for transportation improvements in the city of Falls Church, $5 million for the Richmond Highway BRT, $9 million for improvements to the Arlington Ridge Road and Mount Vernon Avenue bridge renovation shared by Arlington and Alexandria. And I promise I'll conclude here, you've been really instrumental in galvanizing support for the Long Bridge expansion, which has, of course, the potential to unlock a tremendous amount of economic, housing, as well as transportation opportunity for our region. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Representative Beyer to share any remarks and then join us in conversation.
Katie, thank you very much. It's fun and a pleasure to be back. I wish we were there in person, but we're running around trying to whack all the different moles out there. But by the way, I represent the best congressional district in the country by far. And any way you look at it, certainly the most politically sophisticated, the second most educated, and certainly the best set of elected officials. So I'm really pleased to be with you. And it's fun to be able to talk on the day when we passed the Peter DeFazio infrastructure bill, to be able to talk about it. You know, the COVID-19 pandemic just wreaked havoc on many regions' transportation systems, especially ours, because we've been so dependent on WMATA over all these years. So I was very proud to vote for every COVID relief package. Most of them happily were pretty bipartisan, all but the American Rescue Plan at the end. And I think we got $500 million into the ARP just for WMATA. So I'm not on the WMATA board, not like Paul or others, but my hope is that all those cuts that the general manager had to announce last year can go by the board, that we've put in enough money to bring Metro back. And it's been really fun going now that the Capitol's opened back up to see the people pouring out of Capitol South, that all our staffers are coming back to Metro. I'm very much hoping that the return to work, that you'll see all the trains and buses and stuff really kicking in. The INVEST Act, the $547 billion Surface Transportation Reauthorization Bill. And this, it's a different bill, but it's sort of roughly the same size as the bipartisan infrastructure bill that Mark Warner's been a lead on, with people like Mitt Romney and Joe Manchin and Susan from Collins from Maine, and President Biden. So I think we're clearly at like a minimum of $550+ billion over the next 5 years. And when you start to take it out over 8 years, it's looking like a really big number. There are differences between the House version, which was largely partisan. Sadly, we didn't want it to be that way, and the bipartisan Biden, Manchin, et cetera, compromise. Lots of roads, lots of bridges in each. The House bill has a lot more policy in it, and most of the policy is around environmental investments. But it's 10,000 bridges, 200,000 miles of road, something like that. But record investments in passenger rail, public transit, cycling and walking infrastructure, and zero emission options. And of course, the exciting part is this could be a great job creator for the years to come. Short-term job creation, because people have to go to work to build the roads and the bridges and the broadband and the new electrical grid, but also great long-term. That we struggled through the last decade, the decade of the teens, with 1.6 to 2.6% growth, average around 2.1, which most people felt was pretty anemic compared to 20th century American history. We'd love to get it back to 4%, 4.5%, 5%. And we can do it, but it's that core investment in infrastructure, both human and physical capital, that's going to make that possible. Katie, thanks for calling out my 4 district-specific project requests. When they brought earmarks back with a nicer name, of course, we started to get flooded from the nonprofits. And we added up and found out that there were 1,000 nonprofits just in the 8th district. We thought, and we were only allowed to put in 10 requests. We thought, trying to figure out the 1% of the nonprofits that qualify is above my pay grade. So instead, we went to our local elected officials, our mayors and county board chairs, to say, what do you need? And I was really 4 of those 10. At another time, we'll talk about the other 6, but the 4 tonight that were transportation related, all were approved, which is, I'm really pleased. I'm trying to stay really good friends with Peter DeFazio, chairman of House Transportation and Infrastructure, because as you all know, all of politics is relationship. But the money, these were requests from Arlington and at the city of Alexandria to renovate Arlington Ridge Road and the Mount Vernon Bridge. We got that. We got the multimodal transportation infrastructure for the city of Falls Church, the Richmond Highway BRT on behalf of Fairfax County, and then the Long Bridge Rail Project. Things in Washington work differently than Richmond. Richmond has this, our Virginia Constitution has the one object rule, which means every bill shall have one object, which will be reflected in its title. So those bills tend to be small, and they pass many of them. On the Hill, we occasionally pass really big bills. It's a much slower process. So rarely do you get a bill with your name on it. But the Long Bridge Rail Project, which I did with Rod Whitman, a Republican, has the Buyer Whitman, or the Whitman Buyer of Long Bridge. We actually got that authorized. So that was exciting. And obviously, all these things should make an enormous difference. You probably know that the Long Bridge is the single biggest bottleneck in rail from Florida all the way to New York City. So that opening that up will be enormously helpful. And unless you've been living under a rock, you know that things are still uncertain. My first aphorism I learned in politics was, quote unquote, a week's a long time in politics. And there are many examples. But now with the Senate negotiations, it seems like it's an hour. And I can't, I'd be over my head predicting exactly how this is going to come about. It's pretty clear, though, that the commitment that Joe Biden made to the Republican senators in the bipartisan Senate infrastructure bill will be the cap about how far we go. That even if we don't end up adapting that as a bipartisan alternative, which I hope we do, a later reconciliation bill that passes on strict partisan lines still won't exceed what the Biden, Manchin, Sinema, Collins, et cetera, have negotiated. Also, it looks like by the end of July, end of this month, there will be a new budget reconciliation out of the Senate and probably out of the House, which sets up the process for big budget reconciliation, which would likely happen in September. For those of you thinking transportation plus, the plus part are things like making the child tax credit permanent, the expansion in earned income, the money for 3- and 4-year-old education, the whole human infrastructure part of sustained long-term economic growth. So trying to be the most, if I had to bet, I'd say November for final passage and on the president's desk for all the infrastructure money that we're talking about tonight. In a perfect world, we'd agree to it this month and just take the smaller bipartisan deal and move ahead. I've been very pleased that President Biden has said that the bipartisan infrastructure is not going to be tied to what will almost certainly be partisan investment in human capital. We don't want our Republican friends to feel that we're acting in bad faith on that. And I think we can always take up the second part later. And then in a worst case, it all gets mixed into one big bill, which unfortunately likely to be more partisan than not. But that's not the direction that I hope we end up going in. Anyway, one of the biggest things out there still is we have the Senate pay-fors, which are thin, and those of you who actually have to pay for your budgets every year will see how thin they are. A lot of it depends on clawing back unpaid taxes from wealthy people, which is not the easiest thing to do. So we're still likely to see some revenue measures coming that will help pay for all this in the weeks to come. And the most obvious one was the big win today when you had something like 67 countries agree to a 15% minimum tax on foreign earnings, US companies overseas or Swiss companies overseas. This will deal with the Apples in Ireland that pay 4% and the others in the Grand Caymans that pay 0%. And now that we're not going it alone, we're going with all those other countries, including China. This will be a really major new revenue for us from people who should be paying the taxes anyway. Anyway, that's the quick update. I can say with 99% certainty, by the time of Thanksgiving coming, we will have as Biden says, a once-in-a-generation new investment in infrastructure. And hopefully that will be very good for a region like ours that is so dependent on transportation. Katie, I yield back, and I'm happy to answer any questions if I can.
Thank you so much. And Thanksgiving sounds like a wonderful target towards which we can all hope. Thank you for not only the recap of some of the specific thoughts on transportation policy and investments, but also the the insight into the sausage making. I think we're all sort of watching with bated breath this body of government that so differs from our own. The only thing you left out were any puns, Representative Byer. I promise. I never hear you speak without one. So we'll give you a minute to think of a good transportation pun. And while you do, colleagues, any questions either about the presentation or other priorities with regard to transportation? Please, Mr. Snyder.
Representative Byer, thank you so much for your representation of Falls Church and your entire district on transportation issues. It is very much appreciated. I wondered what you thought of the policy aspects, what your sort of priorities are for, environmental related policies and things like that you'd like to see finally survive from all of the back and forth.
Well, thanks, Dave. I mean, I obviously would love to see them survive, and that's probably the biggest single difference between the House version and the Senate version. Is the House version has a big policy chunk, largely environmental, and the Senate has none at all. They were just focusing on the things that we could buy with dollars over the next 5 years. The policy type things are, for example, a big commitment to low emission vehicles and zero emission vehicles. Lots and lots of investment in the electrification of automobility. We've got bills that I'm pretty optimistic about passing out of Ways and Means and the full House and Senate this year on tax credits for our commercial vehicle fleet, all the trucks, big and little, that are delivering to all of our neighborhoods. And I'm lead co-sponsor on a big bill for just a direct subsidy to local governments to replace buses with new electric buses. Because I know they're just way too expensive. And as a local government, you don't get to take advantage of a tax credit. So those are the kinds of differences that are in there. And I have to say at this point, most of the environmental stuff, because it's transportation, are around moving vehicles.
That's really exciting to hear as someone whose jurisdiction is grappling with electrification of our fleet and the hefty price tag. I'll be rooting on that legislation. I imagine others are in the same boat.
Yeah, the problem is that the purchase price is really high. The maintenance is a lot lower.
What I've got while others think of theirs, you mentioned, which I think was music to our ears, was the idea of, or the visual of congressional staff pouring out of their metro station. One of the things we've been grappling with and talking amongst ourselves about, and I know Commissioner Spedberg could speak to the WMATA board's been thinking about as well, is trying to get a bead on return to work and what commuting patterns might look like. I'd be fascinated knowing the federal government is one of our largest employers in the region. What, if anything, you all have heard from agencies and others in the federal government about their return to work policies and whether they start to anticipate their employees will be commuting once again?
Yeah, Katie, I think we're in for a different work structure in the years to come, and that's not limited to the federal government. One of my closest friends has a company with 800 people, none of whom want to come back. So where we are so far, at least with OPM, is very liberal telework policies, and I would imagine that I can't put a percentage on it, but so many people have gotten used to working from home, prefer working from home, are efficient doing it, and don't have to shave or shower in the morning, that you'll see a lot more of it. On the other hand, my office, they're thrilled to be back because they have that human interaction again, and they can sit together and work on things. But I think it's unrealistic to assume that anytime soon the federal government will return to the type of in-person work that they had pre-pandemic.
It's a really good insight. Thank you. Mr. DeFerranti.
I wanted to follow up on the specific bill you mentioned, because I would love local governments to have funding for buses, and we've all taken steps in the last few years to set targets for going to electric buses. Do you have any thoughts about, if that local government piece doesn't come through, is there a plan B for how to try and get in the final package some resources so we can move to buses?
Yeah, I think I don't have a plan B other than, if we request 500 billion and we don't get it, if we can get 200 billion or 100 billion, that's a big step in the right direction. Jeff Merkley on the Senate side is leading it, and I am on the House side. And the good news is we are spending a lot of money, lots and lots of money. The careful news is we have to be watching inflation and watching the long-term federal debt, which you saw new numbers tonight about how big it's going to be for the next year. But we also know that if you can transform the public transit fleet into something that's electric or even hydrogen based, it has an enormous climate impact over the years to come. So again, I can't promise success, but I can promise it's a very worthy goal, and we're getting lots of people on board, and including lots of Republicans, because Republicans are representing so many of these jurisdictions also.
Thank you, Congressman. And that off-screen voice is Matt from Arlington.
Excellent. And we can look at ways that we can support that legislative effort as well as the commission, I imagine. Please, yeah. Mr. Alcorn.
Hi, Congressman. Walter Alcorn from Fairfax County. I don't know where to talk.
Camera is in the back corner. Right
Oh.
there.
So my question is, just to follow up on that, we definitely have needs in terms of buying new electric buses, but we also have tremendous infrastructure needs in terms of developing the charging infrastructure, in terms of, the maintenance that's going to be required is going to be different from the diesel buses. So, any kind of flexibility you give, if you are able to get money for electric buses, the local governments, we could also use some of that for infrastructure. Those are big needs for us.
Yeah, thanks, Walter, for that point. Yeah, this obviously, I'm not a local government official, but I know a constant, very understandable theme is please give us more flexibility. Don't tie our hands as the money comes down. So I will try to make sure that's reflected in the legislation. And I do know in both the House and Senate versions, there's a huge commitment to charging stations. Now, I guess one of the things we need to look at is not just halfway between Washington and Richmond, or between Richmond and Roanoke, but also in the bus barns that you have spread throughout Fairfax, Arlington, Alexandria, Loudoun, et cetera. By the way, one of the scary parts I can tell you as a former automobile dealer, where our whole revenue stream for the last 45 years has been parts and service, and the first service on an electric Chevy Bolt is at 100,000 miles. There can be a lot of mechanics available for you to take to work on your buses. You just have to help them make the transition from internal combustion engine to electric motors.
Thank you. Excellent. All right. I know Senator Bell's been waiting, then I saw Chairman McKay and then Mr. Turner. Senator Bell.
Hi, how are you doing, Congressman? Thank you so much for the great briefing. We really appreciate everything. Can you hear me now?
We can.
Okay. Thanks for the great briefing and for all that you're doing for us. We really appreciate it. Question. This is in the weeds a little bit, but or maybe a request. Anything you can do as particularly the Pentagon, the Crystal City area goes back to encourage them to use the metro and use those subsidies, because we want those folks on the buses in the metro, and we need them there, frankly, in order to make things work. We don't have enough parking or places for everybody to drive back and forth. So anything that you can do to encourage them legislatively, we really appreciate that, because that's a big user, and we really need to get back on those resources. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Senator. The other thing we can do too is reach out to the leadership. Awful lot of our Northern Virginia friends are going to be in positions of responsibility. Carlos Del Toro from Fairfax will be our new Navy Secretary. Frank Kendall, who's been living in Northern Virginia for a long time, the new Undersecretary or Deputy Secretary. Well, we'll talk to those folks also, trying to make sure that they're encouraging their staff to come back and use Metro.
Nothing more
Metro in the
persuasive
buses.
than someone who sat in 95 traffic leading a federal agency, right? Thank you. Chair McKay.
Thank you, and thank you, Congressman. Actually, Senator Bell stole my thunder a little bit. I was going to ask you in terms of the federal employees where you see the federal transit benefit going. Obviously, it would seem like a strategic time maybe to enhance that even further. so that, more of our federal workforce can get on our trains and buses. And the other piece of this, and I understand that, a lot of folks don't want to come back, but just keep in mind that for us in local government, our employees are watching what's happening with federal employees, watching what's happening with state employees. And so we have a very similar difficulty of getting our own employees to come back to work. And of course, the private sector is all over the place, but the marker that our public employees oftentimes use is what is OPM and what is the federal government doing in terms of encouraging people to come back to the workplace. So if there's a way maybe to enhance the federal benefit, to make it even more generous for people to come in, it seemed that not only would help transit, but also would help our local governments get our own public employees, many of which we need to come back to the workplace just from an operational standpoint. So I don't know if you know where the future of that is going, if now is the time for us to press that a little bit harder as local government officials. We certainly can, but wanted your feedback on that.
Yeah, Chairman, thank you. Those are really good thoughts. And if we enhance the transit subsidy, we should be careful not to enhance the parking subsidy. So that we actually create a differential
Right.
there. And I've not met the new head of OPM. In fact, I don't even know if he or she has been appointed yet. But I'll work closely. As you know, Congressman Connolly is one of the powerhouses on the Government Oversight Committee, as is Jamie Raskin from the 8th District of Maryland. So I'll get with those guys as we talk to OPM about what's happening with the federal employees. I had not thought about the announcement effect, the symbolic effect that has on your employees. So we'll try to make sure that we think about that too.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Turner, I think you were next.
Congressman Byer, this is a very minor point, but as an electric vehicle driver, I feel compelled to make it. Standing up a charging infrastructure is the first step. I can't tell you how many times and how frustrating it is to stop someplace at a charging station, quote unquote, that does not work. I don't know what the maintenance package looks like or the sustainability package of charging infrastructure looks like. We're just now starting to look at it in Loudoun County where I'm the supervisor. If there's any language in there about sustainment and maintenance of the charging infrastructure, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know because I haven't read the entire thing, but it's a really good point, and I will take it back to the team. And you're absolutely right. It doesn't make any sense to have charging stations that don't work, and how frustrating that is. And it's interesting. One of the things the Senate's talked about is, a fee per year per electric vehicle because they're not paying the gas tax, which is slowly becoming less relevant. And the policy dilemma there is we want to encourage people to get into electric vehicles, and by then penalizing them because they're not using gas is counterproductive. So that's a debate still to be finished, probably in reconciliation between the two bills, because that's something the House clearly did not include. But I'll check too on charging station maintenance.
Other questions for the congressman? All right, seeing none, just a sincere thank you again. It's terrific to have this opportunity to just converse with you as you represent so many of us, and certainly have been a champion for the region and our interconnectivity, especially when it comes to transportation. So thank you for your generosity of time tonight and the excellent thoughts you've shared with us.
Thank you very much, Kate, Chairman Crystal, and thank you. Have a good meeting. And I'll tell you, as the only certified auto mechanic in Congress, I really like it when we take care of things on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, thank you again. And as we move on to, as the congressman leaves, I'll thank in particular his his district liaison, Noah Simon, who helped coordinate. He's joining us this evening. Okay, so our first action item of the night, we have the minutes from our previous meeting of June 3rd. I am looking for a motion to approve those minutes.
Second.
Moved by Senator Evan. I think I'll give a second to Speaker Filler-Corn. Is there any discussion about the minutes? Okay, seeing none, we will call for a vote. All of those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions in the room? Ms. Bennett Parker? All right, For those on the phone, Senator Bell and Mr. Smedberg, yay, nay, or abstentions on the minutes?
Senator Bell votes aye.
Excellent. Thank you both so much. So much better. All right, Ms. Gilchrist, you got everyone? Fantastic. Okay, so our next action item, and actually our last action item, at least until we get to VRE, is to authorize the chair to send a letter of endorsement for Fairfax County's raise application. So let me turn it over to Ms. Mattice to introduce the project and the proposal that the commission endorsing.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So indeed, the commission is being asked to authorize the chair to send a letter of endorsement for Fairfax County grant application to the U.S. Department of Transportation for funding consideration under the Raise Transportation Grant Discretionary Grant Program. And Fairfax County is seeking $25 million in raise funding to support the overall $730 million funding package for the bus rapid transit along the Richmond Highway, a vital corridor connecting residents, commuters to major transportation hubs and employment centers. And the project directly responds to Northern Virginia's transportation goals by making improvements to the existing transportation network, enhancing connectivity to job opportunities throughout the region, and enabling more sustainable mixed-use development along the corridor.
All right, thank you. I'm going to look to Chairman McKay to speak to it, potentially make a motion.
Thank you. I'll be very brief. First, appreciate this being included in this package. And as Ms. Mattice said, it's a $730 million BRT project, but it's well over a $1 billion infrastructure investment because of all the pedestrian, vehicular safety improvements, bicycle lanes, landscaping, stormwater, all the things that we are familiar with that go into things. But I would just point out that the importance of this project for the county, as is mentioned in the letter, not only is this the gateway to Fort Belvoir, which is critical to our national defense, and Fairfax County's largest employer by far, also of course connects Prince William to Alexandria. And it's a regional corridor of significance. And then lastly, from an economic development standpoint, this is a section of the county that not only can this provide access to Metro, direct BRT access to Metro for tens of thousands of people, but also a part of the county that has long been revitalization area and has been replanned aggressively to support not only BRT, but ultimately potentially future expansion of Metro years from now. And so it's being built with that possibility in place so that the BRT right away could be converted to Metro right away at some point in time in the future. But absolutely a vital project to the county, and I would argue because of the national assets and environmental benefits, project of significant importance as well. Hopefully we'll get this $25 million grant application approved. We just heard from the congressman, collecting funding every place we possibly can. As you can imagine, over $1 billion is significant. So we're trying to get as many funding partners as possible. And so we appreciate everyone's support for it. And I'd be happy to put a motion on the table to approve, authorize the chair to send a letter of endorsement for the Fairfax County raise application.
Second.
Seconded by Senator Evans. Any further discussion or questions about the project or the raise application endorsement? Mr. Chairman, I'm going to actually ask a pretty ignorant question. Is the proposal that this would then connect to the shared BRT on Route 1 that Arlington, Alexandria share?
We would love for it to challenge and city of Alexandria.
Okay.
Making that happen, but it is certainly a vision of mine.
I see I touch a nerve. I will not put my colleagues in Alexandria in the spot. I look forward to further conversation.
Madam Chair, just since we've been nudged, it's funny because I've run into some Fairfax County Department of Transportation staff, and we should open the line.
We will do that, and I will say, we do run BRT system on Route 1 corridor called the Rex that does tie into the city of Alexandria and has stops in the city of Alexandria. It's just not in a fixed lane like this BRT system would be. So at the BRT and general travel lanes, BRT from the standpoint of limited stop, stuck in the same traffic as everyone else, and it circulates in the city of Alexandria. That to allow that circulation. It's a WMATA service, not a Fairfax County run service because of the jurisdiction that it serves. But so we have buses going in there now, so hopefully continue to move more this way.
It's terrific to hear. I know and transit has been a real success for our jurisdictions, and the idea that that could extend even further, including to Fort Belvoir and other points, is encouraging. All right. Any other questions? Seeing none, the motion has been moved and seconded. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Two on the floor, Mr. Smedberg, Senator Bell.
Aye.
Senator Bell, did you have a hand up? I'm so sorry on that issue before we took a vote. Got a leftover hand from when we had the Congress.
It's a leftover. I'm an aye. Thank you.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. Okay, we will move on then to our main presentation for tonight, or one of our main presentations for tonight, which is a roundtable conversation about some work that the commission staff has been leading on regarding zero fare and reduced fare. As you all know, and many of you made decisions in your own jurisdictions during the pandemic, we all went zero fare in order to keep our transit workers safe, reduce the interaction and dwell time of passengers submitting fare payment, which I think really highlighted the role that the transit played in keeping frontline workers getting to work. But the concept of zero fare transit really had an opportunity to not only help transit recover, but also spurred a conversation about equity in transit. So certainly there are discussions ahead about how we might pursue these interests and potentially shared goals in reduced fare or fare-free transit with a particular eye on our populations for whom transit is either a necessity or a key lifeline to economic opportunity. And so I am really excited to hear more about both the study, the evaluation that our team has undertaken, and an exciting DRPT program that funds exactly these types of initiatives. So without further ado, I'm going to ask our Director of Programs and Policy, Alan Fye, who's going to be moderating the roundtable, to tee it up and introduce our panelists.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, everybody. My name is Alan Fye. I work for NVTC. We're going to have a series of presentations for you tonight to talk about what the chair just set up. So we're going to jump right in with no objections. What I'd like to do is go through all three brief presentations, and then we'll come back for questions and answers. Okay. So first of all, why are we talking about it now? The chair did a great job setting it up. There's an increased focus on equity right now. It's like when you think about it, what role does transit play in equity? There's a long history of transit being involved in the quality movement across our history. Rosa Parks being one of the most famous things right there that in the transit industry really helped change movement to the country. There's also an opportunity to improve access for everyone, especially those who are transit dependent. Really important. They do have these types of programs do have a very real impact on everyday. A pilot in Boston found that low income residents took 30% more trips when they were getting a 50% subsidy for their fares. So they cut their fares, they were able to take 30% more trips, get out there, access to really important services, access to jobs, other essential things that they need to get through this life. So there is a real world application we're starting to see across the country. The other part of it is post-pandemic. It's really forced the transit industry to adapt quickly. We're sitting here in March, and then a few weeks later, we were all sitting at home. Transit had to pivot just as fast and also keep things going for everybody. So we're trying now to figure out ways, how do we get drivers? That's like the big thing post-pandemic, getting people back. The conversation with the service representative buyer. It's an ongoing theme with veterans as well. How do we do that? Zero fare, reduced fare programs are one opportunity to do that, to really get people back. A, people that already rode transit, B, people that may have had barriers to transit, and then also those who may be new to transit in general. So there's lots of opportunities out there to really get folks back out there and do it in hopefully. Next slide. So I'm going to give a quick snapshot of what's happening across the country and across the Commonwealth. This is a very preliminary look of some of the things that are happening out there. On the Virginia side, we have a couple of organizations that are actively looking into going reduced fare or zero fare. GRTC deciding it down to Richmond, CAT down to Charlottesville, definitely looking into. As you'll hear in a minutes, Dash down Alexandria is going fare free this fall. Across the country, we're seeing a lot of it as well. A lot of the stars you see on the map are actually universities. They're kind of leading the way when it comes to zero fare transit. They've been doing it for years. Now it's moving further. The one star right in the middle of the map is Kansas City. They went zero fare last year, and there's a lot of people watching them in the industry to see how it happens. What are the pros? What are the cons? What are the challenges of doing this? Also, some of the big players in transit in the United States really. We have Boston, NVTA, and then LA Metro is actively studying it. What does that mean for the system? Obviously, very different size systems compared to Kansas, but pretty transformational as major transit providers. Next slide. We want to talk to you briefly tonight about this continuum we put together, reduce zero fare. There's all kinds of different options that are out there. So kind of what we're going to talk about tonight is what are the options? This is the focus of local bus service. We'll talk a little about rail and implications of that later. Think about it through the lens of each of your local transit systems. And then as we go through the continuum, don't look at them as mutually exclusive. There's a lot of them where there's some overlap. You can take a little bit from one or the other to customize. I think it's really important to understand that they can be context sensitive to your communities, to your neighborhoods. They're also very scalable, different sizes. So, which also is another thing we'll talk about on the next slide, not yet. But it's basically like, what are the trade-offs? So we'll go very quickly from, I guess, left to right. There's a couple different options you have. You have one's like a limited promotion. It's like something veterans might be considering doing, like getting folks back on. You reduce the costs up front to really get people back post-pandemic. Specific customer groups. We talked a little bit about students already, but known as seniors or folks with disabilities, different groups that are targeted that would really benefit from the program, some of which exists already. You also have zones, like geographic zones or areas. You have Alexandria, for example. You have Trolley, it's just one example. Or maybe there's a circulator system in Tysons, for example, that's very, very focused into a very geographic area that really targets mobility needs in the transit. Time of day is another big consideration. We want to make sure that during the peak, we can get more people on the road by getting them on buses because it's really cheap for free. So that might be one way to help deal with the congestion issues. Places, circulators are free, local buses are free, streetcars free or reduced fares. So there's like lots of options in there. Then also system-wide, it's like you make your whole system completely free. So again, there's a long range of different opportunities here that you can really do. And when we put the white paper out in the fall, it's going to have a very detailed discussion of what each one of these are and some examples of how. Next slide. There's a lot on this slide. I'm not going to read it. So I'm going to kind of hone in on a couple of really important considerations to think. So kind of the first one is like, what is the goal? Is the goal to increase ridership? Goal to increase better access to people. Think about that as you're going through what your ultimate policy goal is for willing to do. There are some pretty big considerations, and I think for a lot of us around the table, the first thing that comes to mind is dollars and cents. How do you pay for something like this? So let's say if you go to zero fare, you no longer have fares coming in. How do you fill that financially? Also operational challenges. Some folks that have gone out there and some of the smaller systems that have started doing it in universities, all of a sudden ridership spikes because it's free, so you now need to buy more buses. It's kind of an operational consideration. One of the other big ones that I think federal space and also the Commonwealth level is the data collection. How do you make sure you get really good data? Because programs and funding programs are tied directly to those numbers that are coming in. So you've got to make sure you're really still able to track that data. And then also in the discussion yesterday, we started talking about smart benefits versus people that have and people that don't. Or folks that have smart benefits that they may not financially need to go zero. But do you want everybody to go zero fare where everybody has opportunity? Or do you want to target specific audiences? If there are smart benefits, especially in this region, really, really important source of revenue, BRE, cost systems, really, really important from the federal government point of view. So who exactly gets those and how we make those decisions of who gets the benefit of the different programs is important. That smart benefits is a really big pot of money in the local Virginia context. And the other part, again, I mentioned earlier, is the scale. So like these can be customized. This city of Fairfax may have a very different need than Fairfax County. We realize at very different scales and very different sizes of things that we have. So there's the one size fits all across the board to think about, how do those different things, how do they keep customized? Next slide. And the big part is, again, we're focused on local costs here, but we can't ignore the fact that region has made massive and significant investment in financial metro rail system, also in VRE. They're different. We can't ignore that they're there, but they're fundamentally different. Each of your jurisdictions, you fund and directly operate your bus service. Metro, rail, and VRE, they're regional bodies. It's more complex. The political dynamics are very different. Also, when you get to the dollars and cents exponentially, you're talking about significantly larger dollar amounts. But one thing to think about also, the rail side, there are some existing reduced fare programs already. You have senior passes. If any organization like Metro takes federal money, seniors automatically are able to free. There are other programs that have been working across the region. DC has been working on a student pass, which is a direct agreement between DC and WMATA to provide that service for students in the school system. So there are different ways that you can really get in there and customize it beyond this. But the other things again I mentioned earlier, the smart trips considerations and smart benefits. Another, again, for Metro or VRE, smart benefits significant there in the system. So that's a very quick snapshot of what the report is going to come out this fall is going to be about. Some of the next steps that we're thinking about at staff level, a little bit of guidance later on, is what is the next step of our analysis? Like the how do you do it? This is the what, so next it goes into the how. So obviously we'll take more questions a little bit later, but start thinking about some of those questions of how NVTC could potentially support it. I think staff will be happy to look into those and maybe come back. So that's the end of my presentation. Like that, I was very brief. We're going to switch over next to Josh Baker, who is General Manager of DASH, the Alexandria. So Josh, I'll turn it over to you.
Are you able to hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, excellent. I will apologize in advance for any delays in my video or audio as I'm coming to you from Long Island, New York. I'm currently on a little bit of a vacation, but I'm very pleased to be able to take a break from vacation and join you all to talk about something very, very exciting for us. If you could go to the next slide, please. Looking forward to running through a few pieces of information here related to our Fare Free program. So just to dive right in here, the city and DASH have been working together in discussions for quite some time, actually, about the implications of the potential to go fare free or to reduce our fares and have reduced fare programs. In fact, most recently, we were fare free during the COVID-19 pandemic from March of 2020 to March of 2021. Many transit systems in the country were actually fare free during this time out of necessity. But one of the things that we saw as an opportunity in the process of being fare free in reaction to the pandemic was to take a deeper look at what fare free meant for our system and how that impacted and helped our community. So in the spring of 2021, we actually had a free/reduced fare study, which was primarily commissioned to focus on the impacts on low income and minority populations within the city of Alexandria and how that type of program, particularly a reduced fare program or a specialized fare program, could help our ridership. That was a MWCOG TLC grant funded study. And it's mentioned here that it's available on the City of Alexandria's website. It's a great study, and I would encourage anyone who's interested in thinking about reduced fare or fare-free programs to take a look at it, because it really dives into a lot of the details and things to think about as the implications of going fare free or reducing the fare for specific populations within a regional service area. So that's a little bit of the background as to some of the experiences we had and some of the work we did with our fare free study. Now, when it came to our fiscal year 2022 budget, we were very fortunate to have a very transit supportive city council, several members, of course, whom serve here on the NVTC board. And there was an increased interest and discussion about the opportunity to go fare free. You know, the environment is different right now. This is an environment where people are slowly and hesitantly returning to transit. And we recognize that this was a potential opportunity to implement a program such as this and really see what the impact is. Further, in September of 21, we're going to be launching our new Dash network. This is an intensive redesign of our entire transit system. And so the correlation of these two, combined with the fiscal ability of the city and city council looking to find a way to fund the losses in fare revenue, which are notably different right now relative to a full service period when we might have $4+ million worth of fare revenue. You know, we're looking in the area of about 1.5 million in lost revenue. And that's relative, of course, to the amount of ridership we have. So a lot of things have come together and given us the opportunity to really jump into this. Now, granted, we've been talking about it and studying it, but you know, ultimately what it came down to for us is here's an opportunity, and further, here's an opportunity to do something that requires less administrative burden, less intricacies, less details as it relates to finding specific populations to benefit from a reduced fare program. Instead, just simply by going fully fare free. So in preparation for this, we've spent some time interviewing with multiple different transit systems that have experience with the fare free operations, both during and prior to COVID. So as we go on the next slide here, we spent some time looking for lessons learned. So now we've figured out we can go fare free in September, but the big question becomes, what are the potential implications of that? Not only of the benefits of our riders, but also the potential challenges that our transit system might face. So we spoke with DC Circulator, Corvallis Transit, which is in Oregon, and Charm City Circulator, just to name a few. We ultimately realized through those discussions that generally fare free or even reduced fare programs within transit net a positive experience both for the rider and for the system. Ridership increases varied in what we saw between 26 and 59% cited from previous years. Again, these are examples from these specific systems. We don't have data yet from Dash. We certainly would be happy to come back and talk about that once we've been in our fare free program for a little bit. A couple of notes that we got from those conversations was the importance of identifying funding. As someone who's been in transit my entire career and I have had these conversations both in Alexandria and other localities, ultimately, this largely comes down to money, right? So we're all dealing with challenges related to transit funding. And then when you take away farebox revenue, it further complicates the issue. So finding dedicated funding and sources to support a program like this was one of the key elements that were identified by other transit systems that we spoke with, and certainly something we're keeping a close eye on. And as Jen DeBrule is here to talk about, we're looking forward to the opportunities presented by the TRIP program. We are recognizing also through these conversations that being aware that conditions could change, and you always have to think about the worst possible outcomes. Many of these systems cited the importance of realizing how you're going to resume fare collection in a quick manner if it's needed. We're certainly hopeful that that's not the case, but that's something to be aware of. The other implications that we recognized are certainly important, although they don't specifically apply to Dash in a direct way right now, but they may in the very near future. And that is certainly Title VI equity considerations, equity analysis, and things that have to be done both locally in regards to compliance for equity reasons, but also on a federal level. So these are all certainly some considerations and lessons that we took away from our conversations. Some of the implementation considerations, so specific to our operations, were safety and training, recognizing that the opportunities of going fare-free are certainly outweigh the negatives, but we recognize that there are potentials for challenges. One of those is that ensuring that riders have destinations, attending to rules for riders that specify what types of belongings they can bring on the bus, so that you have clear aisles and adequate room for other passengers. And certainly, one of the important things here is to recognize that when transit is more open to more people, and many of those people are without any other means, and sometimes without even a home, there's the opportunity that they may spend more time on transit than they would have previously. And so being in close contact with health services, police, and other local agencies that can help, especially with mental illness and other types of challenges that we may face with riders who don't have a home, was an important thing for us. Customer service is an important part of Dash, and it's something that we also considered. We did hear from other systems that oftentimes when they went fare-free, customer complaints increased significantly in the first couple of months, mostly attributed to what I just mentioned. But they did realize and they did see that those complaints certainly reduced over the course of 2 to 3 months. So one of the things Dash is doing going into this is making sure we have a robust communications plan to make sure we're ready for that. And last but not least, onboard equipment, fare boxes. As many of you know, being connected with the transit industry, the collection of fares is a significant cost. And Dash is certainly has experienced that just like everybody else. The cost of acquiring and maintaining fare boxes is quite frankly outrageous. You can see fare boxes costing in excess of $20,000 plus for a single fare box. So there's a lot of opportunity here to save on capital investments. But we also realize that we rely heavily on that technology that's in place to figure out how many people are riding. So we have turned our attention and our focus to completing our automated passenger counter installations. We're looking at how to validate those in an effective way to ensure compliance with national reporting requirements, but also to make sure that we are able to look back at this program and talk to entities like yourselves and tell them in a meaningful way exactly the impact that this type of program has had. Our city council, the ATC board of directors, and others are going to be looking very closely to hear from us as to what the impact has been of such a program. So these are certainly some of the implementation considerations we've been looking at. On the next slide, I'll wrap up by talking a little bit about our fare-free framework. Now, this is something that we identified at Dash as an important component to figuring out how are we going to chart a course within the organization and externally, and most importantly with our board of directors, as to what the expectations are, how we maintain the program, and any implications of changes externally are to the organization. So this identifies key factors to inform management, the evaluation of the program, and modifications of fare-free programs in the future. A couple of the items here are our primary goals, which are to reduce the cost-related barriers while increasing transit usage by promoting awareness, increasing efficiency and reliability by reducing dwell times and keeping the buses moving. These are benefits of going fare-free, and they're important primary goals we've recognized within this program. The next bullets are funding. So recognizing the key here, as I mentioned earlier, a program like this relies on the ability of the locality to fund the losses of the elimination or reduction of fare collection. Now, that is not entirely always encumbered by the locality, but it's certainly a key factor here. I mentioned earlier, I think you're going to hear about the TRIP program, and we see this as a really exciting opportunity to help bridge this gap. But we've recognized that we have challenges even in the first year to make sure that we're able to sustain this program. So we have been very aggressive in making sure that we look at every opportunity, pick up every stone, look in every corner to make sure that we're utilizing and maximizing the available funding. The last bullets here are some considerations that we recognized are critical in the fare-free framework. The program can only continue with sufficient funding, and our board has recognized that a priority for us is to ensure the implementation and expansion of our Alexandria Transit Vision Plan, which is the framework for the new Dash network. It's widely recognized that investments and enhancements in public transit are highly beneficial to the community, and we want to make sure that those are not lost in the context of going fare-free. We think they are very complementary programs, and they are both very, very important, and we're very, very thankful to have them. But we just want to make sure that we don't lose focus and that that is funded in the future. Public outreach is an important component here to understand the impacts and to help make sure that we are able to be responsive to our stakeholders and to tell them about the program and the difference it's making on people's lives. So we've recognized that in our framework. We've also recognized that we should have a strategic plan related to our fare collection equipment. You know, look, if we go fare free for a year and then a year or two later, we're no longer to be able to be fare free, but we've removed and discarded all of our fare collection equipment, we could be in a very bad spot. So we're making sure that we have a roadmap to ensure we understand when and how that equipment will gradually be decommissioned and retired and disposed of. Fare reinstatement, we've recognized requires a minimum number of years to re-implement. And as many of you may be aware, the region is dealing with antiquated fare collection equipment to begin with. So new generations of fare boxes, new technology, we need to be prepared to implement that if we were to go back to collecting fares at some point. And ultimately, in the end, as I mentioned a couple of times here, it's really important to us to evaluate this program to be able to understand the impact it's had on our riders and on the region. So with that said, I would just say that we are excited to be taking the first steps here. I really thank the Commission for giving us the opportunity to talk about this program, for our council members who serve and who've worked hard to fund this, to the ATC Board of Directors who've supported it, and ultimately to the staff who figured out a way to put it into place. I think it's going to have a huge impact on our ridership, and I think the timing is really particularly helpful as it relates to the economic investments within the city to bring us back from COVID to support small businesses and economic growth and development within the community. So I hope that I've given you a pretty decent look at what some of the things we've been doing and how we've been working on this. And I'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
All right, thank you, Josh. Appreciate that. Coming to fly from New York. But next we'll move right along to our next speaker, Jennifer DeBrule, is the Chief of Public Transportation for the Department of Rail and Public Transportation. She's going to talk us through the Transit Ridership Incentive Program. So Jennifer, take it away.
Good evening. Hopefully, do a quick sound check. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. We're having some bad weather here in Richmond.
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. So I'm here this evening to talk about a program that we're very excited about, and that's our new Transit Ridership Incentive Program, or TRIP. If we could go ahead and go to the next slide. Just to give you a little background, the TRIP program was established as part of the Transportation Omnibus Bill that passed in the 2020 General Assembly session. It is a two-part program. It has two very separate and distinct priorities. The First is to promote increased ridership of large urban transit systems by improving regional connectivity. And then also to reduce barriers to transit use for low-income individuals by supporting the creation and improvement of zero fare and low-income pilot programs. So two very different elements, but two very important elements in terms of supporting our transit systems and our transit growth around the Commonwealth. Of course, this legislative language passed, and very, very shortly thereafter, we began dealing with COVID. So we did delay the implementation of this program as we worked our way through the pandemic. We are now working on the development of the policy and anticipating taking that to the Commonwealth Transportation Board for approval later this month. So really right now on the cusp of getting this program out the door for implementation. Even though we were dealing with COVID last year, we did not waste any time when it came to TRIP. We worked with our stakeholders. We did a request for ideas and sample projects that we used to help inform the development of our policy. We also had a couple of work groups that dealt with the two separate pieces of TRIP. That all of that went into helping us formulate the policy that's been out for public comment and is now scheduled to go to the board later this month. So we are excited to finally get things going. Next slide, please. So I want to talk a little bit, and I'm focusing only on the zero fare low income side of TRIP tonight. We can have a conversation another time about the regional routes, but there really are three different types of projects or pilots that we see as part of the TRIP program. First is the provision of subsidized or fully free passes targeted to low-income populations. That's one of those types of projects on the continuum that Alan shared earlier. Those are passes to individuals based on need. There have been projects like that in other parts of the country. So that is one way that these projects could be developed. Another way is to eliminate fares on high capacity corridors. And so this would be zero fare zones or targeted areas or routes that serve low income populations and connecting those populations to vital services. And finally, the deployment of an entirely fare-free system. This is something, as Josh put so well, that we learned through COVID was how to transition ourselves to a zero fare system and how that might work. For those systems that want to take on those types of pilots, obviously there are some financial and technical capacity considerations around deployment of those projects and defining the need and looking at appropriate planning to do those projects as well. So those are the three types of projects broadly that we envision under the TRIP program. We can go to the next slide. So in terms of funding, the way that the TRIP program was established in legislation is it is a percentage of our Commonwealth Mass Transit Fund, which all of those revenue sources phase in over time. With fiscal year 24, we see the realization of those revenue sources. So that's where we start to see between $22 and $24 million a year once we get out to fiscal year 24 and beyond. The way the legislation is structured is that we can utilize up to 25% of the TRIP program funding to support zero fare and low income pilot projects. So once we get out to fiscal year 24, again, we're talking about between $5 and $6 million a year that are available specific for those zero fare and low income pilots, and that is funding that is available on a statewide basis. One of the things that did come out of the 2021 General Assembly session and was included in the budget with some specific funding in fiscal year 22 was an additional $10 million out of the 2021 Transportation Initiative funding package that was dedicated specifically for zero fare pilots. So that is a real boost for our first year of implementation of TRIP, that we'll actually have more funding available in the TRIP program for zero fare and low income than we will for the regional route part of the program. So very exciting, and we're very much looking forward to getting that solicitation for applications out later this year. Next slide, please. So in closing, I want to talk a little bit about how we envision looking at the potential projects or the applications that come in for TRIP funding, and some of the things that we want to leave you with in looking at how TRIP may help individual jurisdictions or the region meet goals as it pertains to zero fare projects. We really are looking for projects that are very well planned. Looking at projects much like Josh stated in Alexandria, where they've done a lot of planning work. They have very well-defined and quantifiable measures of success. They have an approach and a process outlined for how those projects would be evaluated and implemented over time. We're looking for projects that are collaborative. And with the zero fare aspect of the TRIP program, we're really looking for some innovation and a different way of looking at partnerships. And those partnerships could, there could be some different ways that organizations are looking at funding zero fare into the future. It could be partnerships with localities, units of government, but there could also be partnerships with the business community, the nonprofit sector. So we're really looking for those projects that really are collaborative in nature. And we're also finally looking for projects that are quickly implementable, that have the structure in place, the existing technical capacity and project management to be able to get those projects up and running in a quick implementation timeline so that we can start evaluating how these zero fare pilots are working in different parts of the state and in different operating environments. So with that, I'm going to wrap up and just say that as we roll out the policy going to the board later this month, looking at anticipating opening that application cycle and making our first project selections later this year. So it's a very exciting time and look forward to the continued discussion and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Jennifer. So just to kind of reinforce what was said throughout here is that we've put a lot of time and effort into all this work, and we've actually engaged very heavily with all of your staffs around the table from the white paper that NVTC is doing, as Jennifer mentioned, the work that the RVP is doing, reaching out, talking, having these conversations, engaging your policy experts as well as your technical experts to help us move these forward and keep things going. So with that, I think I know there's a lot of information that we threw at you tonight, but we're happy now to answer any questions or listen to discussion that you may have on this topic.
Thank you very much. Sir, the delegate Reed.
Yes, Madam Chair. So Director Fye, one of the things that you had mentioned is that as you look at reducing fares, you probably will possibly increase more riders, need more buses, and that costs more money. So when you're doing that evaluation, are you then able to, on the other side of the equation, look at the reduction in money that would potentially be spent on roads or the use or the environmental benefits of actually things like that? Because it's like we need to be able to kind of have a complete evaluation of there are some benefits that might not necessarily equate cost for additional buses.
I think that's a great point. I mean, you're really hitting at the complexity of what it is. Some of the things we had on there are the environmental benefits. It's hard to sometimes directly put a dollar amount on there. So when you look at this cost benefit analysis of doing this, it really has to do almost like what Josh has done, what he talked about. He'll look at the whole span of all the different types of impacts you could possibly have. You're right. Maybe there are cases that, okay, we can save money over here on roads because there aren't enough drivers, so you can put that in. I think that's part of the policy discussion that will happen at the local level, making those decisions. Where do we put those dollars? Local governments go through that exercise every year, making sure you're prioritizing the right thing. But the complexity of it and doing that full analysis is going to be really, really so important as any of the jurisdictions really move forward with this type of
Mr. Turner.
I'm going to follow up on that exactly because it was my exact question. Just on the back of the envelope. So I classify them as first, second, third order effects. So first order, you're going to have less revenue from fares, obviously, but you're also going to have less cost because of the fare boxes and infrastructure that has to support all that. And then you're going to have an immediate impact on equity. I mean, I don't know how you measure it, but there's an immediate, obvious impact on a major stride forward in equity. Equity is sort of on the front burner out here in Loudoun County, as I'm sure you're all aware. Second order, I would say your operational costs are going to have to go up because your capacity, your ridership is going up probably pretty significantly based. And then there's an unknown factor, which is the cultural change of now you're taking an auto-centric society and really moving it writ large over into a transit-oriented society, probably overnight. So I guess that leads me to the follow-on conclusion is, and I think David may have asked this question just between he and I, but I would think you would almost have to set a time certain to say, we are going to go zero-based fare system-wide for X number of years, and then we're going to vote on whether or not we like it and want to keep it or not. Rather than suddenly saying, oh, we made a mistake, now let's really quick retool back up to collect fares again. I think you got to dive into the deep end of the pool and say, we got to be in this for X number of years, and then we'll assess and come back. Because I don't know, are there any metrics or tools that you can use to measure all the complex algorithm that goes into that, what the net is of the project is? And then the other one I have is there any federal programs that might support zero fare experiment in the community?
I believe, well, first of all, I think, again, you bring towards the complexity of what this is and measuring all those different things is going to be really important. I think Josh really told the story well of setting up, like, we've got to go in this, and they're setting up council to understand we have a plan, a long-term plan to make sure that we are going to be able to pivot if things change. I think that's part of it. But your approach that you mentioned about committing to multiple years might be something to consider, that we're going to set aside X number of years funding to make sure we can while we're planning on the side in case we have to go back. So I think that's really, really I don't know if Josh wants to add anything to that because they've done a lot of this analysis. Some of these different things we talked about and some of those trade-offs. So Josh, did you have any additional comments? All right.
I want to add a little bit about the federal one, and I know that Alan's talked a little bit about it. It's actually the very indirect thing, which is the transit benefits. The transit benefits is the way that effectively federal revenues are being used to support public transit. And in our area, that's huge. That's 89% of riders on VRE, for example, are using those transit benefits. So while if you're literally to look through the federal transit code, you would see nothing related to fares. If you go to the tax code, that's where you see it. And so it's an interesting story to tell. But what we have sitting in the tax code, and I obviously heard it a little bit earlier, there was a huge fight over the last 10 years to bring transit at parity with a parking benefit in the tax code and linking that permanent. That's what the congressman talked about. That was a big fight. That was a big win. Those are real revenues that all of our transit systems are seeing and can get from those transit riderships. So we are in an interesting, delicate spot here in Northern Virginia in the way that those transit benefits are used to support riders.
And to put a finer point on it, we don't realize any of those federal revenues in our transit systems if we go fair. Chair McKay.
Yeah, I was just gonna, first presentation kind of glossed over the whole DC student fare pass piece. We've been doing that in Fairfax County for years on connector buses. Initiative I'm actually quite proud of because it's been very successful. And I think the gateway to future transit usage is through youth. And so I guess my question, and maybe it's more for DRPT, is, given the high cost of student transportation that our school systems are facing, just wondering if the state has looked at any type of subsidy program for local governments who allow free bus ridership for their public school students. And, I really think if you're going to change attitudes, I've been impressed going into the schools, listening to the kids about the freedom this gives them, the access to jobs it gives them, the equity piece of going back to school, participating in after-school activities. There is a direct correlation in ridership to income, and it's growing in leaps and bounds at our schools since we have this program. So I'd love to hear if there's a specific targeted federal or state thought to incentivizing local governments across Virginia who can do that, recognizing that it doesn't work, obviously, in rural areas and a lot of other parts of Virginia. I'd love to see some type of a higher recognition than just a locality taking a risk in doing that. And we certainly have data to show, what our leadership looks like and what it's doing to our schools and from an equity standpoint. And I think it's just an area of tremendous growth and certainly can be used as a pilot program to look into some of the other larger issues of when you for everyone in the general population. We certainly, in the DRPT presentation, have programs targeted to free passes for low-income populations. So there are systems in place already to designate eligible riders. And I would argue that from a safety standpoint, from an environmental safety standpoint, from an environmental standpoint, from a school budget standpoint, really should be focusing in on those access points for our school kids. Just a thought.
And Jen DeBrule is back now. She may be able to better address it. I think there are some other systems in Virginia that are doing that. I'm not aware of any specific programs for that, but as far as the TRIP program goes, I do first of all want to thank the General Assembly members that advocated for this program as part of the omnibus legislation, because it is such a great opportunity for us to really try out some things and to really support some initial pilots. I really want to also emphasize the importance of having really well thought out pilots, like the work that Josh and his team at DASH have been doing. GRTC as well have been doing a lot of work too to really look at lessons learned and really go into this with a firm plan. We obviously don't have enough funding to fund programs in perpetuity. It really will be a pilot program. And we want to see and hope and expect to see a commitment from the localities funding the transit systems to continuing those programs afterwards, assuming they're successful and they're meeting our ridership goals. We are, as Jen mentioned, we're bringing our proposed program guidance to CTB this month. We were going to bring it last month, but we got some public comments, some really, really good public comments, particularly around the level of share of state commitment and how we had originally proposed a higher match in year one that would then kind of taper down and the local commitment would taper up. But we've received some good feedback about the availability of federal relief funds right now and how some systems may want to utilize that to offset a fare-free program in early years and maybe. So we're looking at some of those things, but this does represent a really good opportunity. I hope it is something where we're going to see some success that it, bringing riders in and also the reduction of cost associated with the fare collection, as Josh mentioned. We also have systems around the state that collect, especially some of the rural systems, less than 5% of their operating cost in fares. And it almost doesn't make sense that they're spending all this money and effort to collect all these fares and market their services when you can do just as much or more by eliminating fares altogether. So we can follow up with you definitely on the school question. I think it's also a great idea because you get young people using transit and start to instill that as a really easy behavior early on. So that might be the type of thing that would be eligible under a program like this under TRIP is where we do have sort of targeted audiences for fare-free programs. But we are seeing some good stuff coming out of some of the systems that we mentioned already.
What's your differentiating back to Delegate Reed?
I think this is fascinating. The slide, Josh's slide on the fare-free framework is really helpful for me. And as you're building this out, I wonder, for me, I don't know percentage of operating costs that's recouped off the top. 5% maybe in the rural area, but that would be a really relevant fact that others may already know or you may already have in the report, but it seems really important to me. And I also, the green slide with the different pieces, I'm trying to think back to when I've been to Europe. You shouldn't, you just walk on and you pay, and you shouldn't pay if you can't afford to pay. And so I feel a little bit as though we focused on the equity component of people getting in for free. But in my particular corner of Arlington County, every damn person should be paying. And so I just wonder if anecdotally it might be useful just to ask someone you know who's in a system in Switzerland or wherever I took the bus 20 years ago, how they do it. Because in addition to those the sort of numeric questions that Jennifer and that we were referring to, we could get a long way in our thinking just by asking and thinking about that question. And it might not be the analytic type thing that we would want to do in a lot of our policy analysis, but it does seem to really help us because long term, I feel like we shouldn't, there is a component of social policy that says, if you can afford to pay, you should be paying.
I just wanted to add on one of the things that Supervisor Turner was saying when he was talking about the equity and the fact that the individuals who would be riding would then not be actually paying the fare. And what then happens is that they then have additional disposable income, and that becomes something that is quantifiable because that then goes back into the economy in a different way. And so again, I think that we can do this calculus that would probably show when you start looking at the benefits, the less money spent on roads, the additional money going back into the economy, that this is probably a very positive thing to do.
I think I saw Mr. Walkinshaw first, then Mr. Alcorn.
Smart benefits issue. Obviously, given the VRE numbers, it wouldn't make sense to make federal records. Do you have any idea roughly what percentage of bus fare is coming from this market? It's not 90%.
It's not 90%. I think years ago we did a little bit of digging in. Program manager, we did a little bit of digging years ago. We can follow up with that. We did some analysis of what percentage of bus riders on. I think it was mostly focused on Metro. I think we follow up on that. It seemed we could actually get some of that data from jurisdictions.
Yeah, most of what I was going to say actually been said, but I did want to point out that building on what Mr. DeFerenti said, it would be ultimately be nice to have sort of a strategic initiative on piloting this, but then also the equity piece, and seeing where those cross. They might not always cross, but perhaps there's also a way to integrate some of our human services delivery programs with this. Maybe have a crosswalk. I know some jurisdictions do that already. Absent totally overhauling the system, students, the people that are getting services from our local governments, it seems like it should be try. That said, I also like the idea, and perhaps this could be done on an experimental basis, but just going all out, like Alexander saying, okay, no system, and then really looking at the impact, not just on fare revenue or system revenue, but in terms of the economy, in the corridor. I think understanding that would help inform later decisions on whether it's.
Mr. Shea.
Sure. Thanks. As I've listened to the discussion, a couple of things I think I'll emphasize that are actually in the materials. The first is setting the goals, and the goals may be different from community to community. In some cases, transit is seen as an economic development generator. It's a way to get tourists or whatever in and out of your business area. So you may want to go no fare for the entire system. On the other hand, if your system basically functions for essential workers, you may want to target the low fares based upon demographic and income. One thing that ought to be common is environmental benefits, but again, that will depend on the community. You may have a community that is already,
Everybody.
Duck and cover for sure.
Mr. Snyder, do you want to finish your thought on that?
yes. So, turn my cell phone off. Never again. I was being polite.
It's okay, we got you covered. 19 other cell phones related.
So I think the goal setting is fundamental, and that may differ sometimes even dramatically from community to community. What are you trying to achieve for this? What, you know, in some communities, it may be a way to encourage school kids to ride it and save money on school transportation. Other communities may not have that. So that's point number one. Point number two is really the long-term sustainability. I think you have to enter these programs assuming that the federal government money may not always be there, that the state program may not always be there. And that once you eliminate the fares, whether you do it broadly or specifically, the minute that you try to go back to raise them creates obvious issues. So I'm interested in how you assure long-term sustainability is a practical matter. So two things, really kind of the beginning and the end of the whole thing. What are you trying to achieve? And how are you going to be able to sustain that over the long term, assuming you're not going to get a lot of help from the federal government or the state?
Yeah, it's a great point. If you don't mind, Mr. Chair, I'll just add one thought of my own too on this area as well. And then I'll see if I can't wrap us up to some kind of close, although Mr. Aguirre, if you have thoughts or Alexandra. I just wanted to sort of build on the thought too, you know, my reaction is not dissimilar from my colleague from Arlington about thinking about wanting to sort of have a progressive fare structure, maybe rather than zero fare structure, because as we do, to link this to Mr. Snyder's point, plan for the long run sustainability, I mean, ultimately, these will need to be paid for out of our general funds. And so I am a bus rider, I'm an art bus rider. Rather than subsidize my ride, I'd prefer our general fund money go to things like affordable housing and a strong social services net. At the same time, you know, it is axiomatic in human services that the greater qualification criteria you layer onto a program to try to get it more targeted, the less efficacious it is, because people who actually would benefit or would qualify are turned off from it. And so I'm really interested in that balance and what we can learn from other communities. You know, if I imagine if you have a certain subset of the population that you're trying to target for equity purposes, there will be some folks that, you know, no matter how low the barriers to entry, and I love Mr. Alcorn's point about you trying to sync it up if you've already qualified for it to be a safety net client, you should automatically qualify. Even that we know will be a barrier that's too great for some. And so, you know, is it, you know, sort of simply inevitable that the only way to truly reach the full vulnerable communities we want to serve through this is to go zero fare, or is there some way to sort of structure it in a more progressive payment system? I have to imagine other communities have wrestled with this, so area I'd be interested in. Yes, Mr. Turner.
I'll just follow on that exact point, is that I was kind of new to this, but any attempt to target a specific demographic or particular income group is an underlying presumption that comes from entitlement, trying to help the unentitled, which immediately stigmatizes the unentitled. It's like the school lunch program.
Sure.
The kids hate the school, well, a lot of kids hate the school lunch program because they're identified as needing a free lunch. Sure. We've got athletic field fees out in Loudoun County, and there was a big discussion that as long as there's any fees at all, when you try and help out the people that can't afford the fees, you're stigmatizing the people that can't afford the fees. I would make the argument, I don't know how you can do a targeted reduced fare for a certain demographic without having the exact opposite equity effect that you're trying to have. That's why I would suggest probably the only really, if you're really interested in equity, the across the board zero fare is the only way to get there.
And you know, Mr. Turner brings up a great point, and that's kind of what I was going to touch on, because when thinking about it, and Delegate Reed brought up all the right questions, you know, what's the impact on the environment? What are the benefits for disposable income? What are the benefits that we're going to see from everybody using public transit and making it more viable. I think it's really, really important. And I actually look back to my own personal experiences as we get another weather alert. I was in North Carolina, and it was funny. I was looking at the map and I was like, oh, I know which star that is, because it was Chapel Hill. And, it was a time when I was working 4 jobs. I could still barely make rent, but I didn't have to worry about transportation money, right? Because I knew the bus would be able to get me to my job and back home. And that was very, very important. So when this became something viable in Alexandria, I mean, I leapt on it because it just opens up so much more. Another thing that we're looking at, right, we're going to be shifting our Department of Community Human Services from where it is currently, which is relatively close to the Orlando Chitilawa neighborhood, to the West End, where we know we need a lot more services on the West End. But if you're a parent and you've got to get 3 or 4 kids on a bus and you got to pay for each kid, forget about it, right? Nobody's going to do that. But the bus is free now. All right. And we have a direct route with which General Manager Baker was talking about. We have our new Alexandria Transit Vision, and it's just the stars are aligning, if you will. I feel like that's been a theme going for a couple of years now, that everything's kind of linking up and working out really well. So I think there's just so much benefit that we're looking at, and thinking about some of the federal benefit. In my mind, it almost expands what we're doing, right? If we're getting more rail and folks on VRE, and they say, hey, you know what? I could actually get off at X place and I don't have to worry about, bus fare. Now I can go wherever I want. So this is now kind of increasing where I can go. So I see this as kind of opening up opportunity and not necessarily in conflict. And I think the other important part is to some of these numbers, right? And Matt, you brought it up, how much does it cost for all the fare collection and all of that versus, if we get rid of it and, the benefits that we're getting from the feds and everything. So I'm just really excited about this. I will admit, being a small jurisdiction as we are, it's a lot easier to kind of push one of these things forward. But I think that we can definitely get a lot of lessons learned to hopefully see what some of our neighboring jurisdictions, especially here around this table, can take a look at as well. But just really, really excited about this.
I want to give Mr. Aguirre the last word. This is exciting. I mean, for Alexandria to have thought deeply about it, and I'm glad that you've been able, and Mr. Baker has been able to bring that thinking and share it with us. I think I would not be out on a limb to suggest that this is an area that the commissioners would like some further study on. Is that, yeah, okay. Seeing nods, and so I think I'm just going to try to sum up as we ask Mr. Fye and colleagues for the commission to keep doing some more additional analysis preparing for the fall. Let me see if I can tee up a couple of areas of interest that I heard. I think we've had some conversations about measuring the second and third order impacts. That gets harder, right? But to the extent that there is data information quantifiable, maybe the first order impacts of the cost effectiveness, the savings on maintenance of those fare boxes relative to foregone revenue. I think we had a couple of interesting points about an interest maybe in differentiating among systems by the percent fare box recovery. What is obviously the right choice for a rural community with 5% fare box recovery, and obviously the wrong choice for VRE with 85 to 90% smart benefits and 50% fare box recovery. I imagine the rest of our systems are somewhere in between and being interested in some differentiated analysis. Smart benefits question in general, I think would bear further exploration. Long-term financial sustainability, I think, is of interest. Some analysis maybe of if there are examples that have done this by populations, be that safety net clients, students, or others. Although I think they've surfaced really interesting sort of different sets of point of view about whether to distinguish by population or the whole. What am I missing? What else are we talking about? You want to add?
One thing to that.
Yeah.
Also emerging, how might those fit in? They're the big, expensive, flashy ones, but also.
Great, thank you.
I was just going to say, I'm really curious about what's already in Director Fye's slide about data collection and how that, integration with the regional travel, because even if someone's getting on for free, can you still track that? Can you still have a smart trip card? That way, you see who's riding, where they're riding, and then they can still potentially get that discount if they transfer to something else.
Yeah, excellent point.
I was going to add one thing that I think that Mr. Schneider was hitting on, which is that what are our overall goals? Are our goals to address equity, or our goals, like what Supervisor Turner was saying, is to move people away from vehicles to transit? Because one is a much more macro goal, one is one that is kind of much more specific. And I think that drives a lot of kind of the industry analysis.
Thank you, Mr. Ryan.
We've been fare-free also since March of 20, still are.
Really?
And I've listened to all this. Everything that's been said is what we've experienced. One additional footnote to this is the marketability of your community. We're small, so we can sort of, we're kind of a lab, and we have all of these elements that are in play. And I appreciate this conversation. You've given me a lot to think about. But I still come down at the final analysis, free for everyone. We're leaving some federal transit money on the table. We leave it on the table. It's because long-term, looked at through the lens of 10 or 15 years, the relative priorities of what we're trying to do will change over time, but all of them are still in play. And so what might be a primary motivator in 2021 or 22 might be a secondary motivator in 2030. And something that's a minor consideration now could be primary later on. And marketability of the community itself, I think, is something that also is in play, not significantly now, but if you have a real estate agent who's trying to sell a home and says that bus stop half a block away is completely free all the time for everyone. I think that in some cases, for some demographics will resonate well with them. So that's just one more footnote.
Thank you, please.
And this has been a fascinating discussion, and absolutely we need to continue this, but also look into some. I especially appreciate, we're not inventing, we're not the first. So we need not reinvent the wheel. But I think it's an interesting conversation with my colleague said, Elliot Reed, also about just, what are our goals and what, and to be perfectly honest, I think in this day and age where we are, we can't look at anything that's most equitable. So I don't really see us being able to move in that direction other than first and foremost now, today. But I agree with what you were saying, things could change, in the future, but we're talking about what are we going to do now? We need to start making those decisions. I think we need to do what's most equitable. I think this does it right now.
Yeah, thank you. The only other area to tee up to for further analysis, we haven't talked about too much so far, is regional cohesion, right? That's what NVTC does best. And so I think wanting to be mindful of, does it matter, right? If you get off of rail system and onto a bus system and one is fare free and the other isn't, if you transfer among various bus systems, et cetera. So some look at that would be helpful. Last word, Mr. Alcorn.
And just to build, it'd be nice for us to be looking towards perhaps some sort of resource for this as a possibility. At least that should be part of the insight. Sure.
Really interesting. All right, this has been a terrific conversation. I really appreciate this. I think this really touches on a lot of the values, frankly, that we hold for our region and our community's future. So I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much, representers, for teeing up the great conversation, Mr. Fye, for bringing it forward, and I think a lot of eagerness to keep exploring this. All right, so we'll take that same enthusiasm into our monthly discussion of the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority. We'll begin with a presentation from Mr. Smedberg. Mr. Letourneau is on a much-deserved vacation, so here just for Mr. Smedberg tonight, and then receive an update from the chair of our WMATA committee, Vice Chairman Aguirre. So first, Mr. Smedberg, before I turn it over to you, congratulations on your re-election as chairman of the WMATA board. I think a validation from your colleagues and a reminder of how well Virginia is served with your appointment to the board. So congratulations, Mr. Chairman, and over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate that. Sorry I couldn't be with you here in person, but wanted to give you this update that Matt and I helped prepare with Andrew's strong hand here. In June, the WMATA board approved the service improvements and fare changes to support the region's economic recovery from COVID-19 and encourage a return to transit. The board approved several changes which were made possible with the federal aid that Representative Beyer mentioned earlier tonight. For Metro Rail, these changes include more frequent all-day service, including on weekends, better peak service, and improved late-night service and hours of service. For Metrobus, these changes include a frequent service network consisting of lines that run every 12 or 20 minutes for most of the day, and restored improved service on additional routes. For fares, the changes include a flat fare of $2 for Metro Rail on weekends, a transfer discount of $2, which means free bus transfers to and from Metro Rail, short-term promotional discounts on WMATA's rail and bus passes, and includes local transit providers in Metro's bus and rail pass products. Additional detail on these changes is provided in the written material that Andrew and the team have provided you this evening. WMATA staff is coordinating with regional staff on fare changes. Local jurisdictions that run their own bus service may choose to match this $2 transfer discount between bus and rail, and if interested, may also wish to be included in WMATA's fare products, or pass products, I should say. Most of these service and fare changes will be in place on or around Labor Day, and the WMATA board will continue to discuss WMATA's fare structure, policy, and other fare initiatives. WMATA staff will continue to monitor ridership and revenue recovery as we are currently projecting an operating budget gap in fiscal year 2024 when federal aid is anticipated to be exhausted. The WMATA board also approved a sustainability vision and principles to provide a framework for WMATA's policy and investment decisions. The board also adopted 3 zero-emission fleet goals to guide WMATA's Metrobus fleet strategy. First, purchasing only lower emission and electric buses in the next bus vehicle procurement, transitioning to 100% zero-emission bus purchases by 2030, and having a 0 or 100% zero-emission-based bus fleet by 2045. WMATA staff will continue to monitor the reliability and performance of electric vehicles and evaluate the facility requirements to support electric buses. Capital costs associated with the zero emissions fleet would require additional funding to be in addition to the current capital program. Important point there, where state of good repair needs alone are anticipated to completely exhaust dedicated capital funding capacity by fiscal year 2027. The WMATA board also approved the allocation of subsidy credits from the American Rescue Plan Act. These subsidy credits totaled approximately $70 million for the Northern Virginia jurisdictions. And lastly, as Chair Crystal had stated earlier, I was appointed chair by my fellow board members, and I made the recommendation that Mr. Letourneau, the NVTC representative to the WMATA board, to serve as chair of the Safety and Operations Committee, and that was also approved by the board at our last meeting. So that's it, Madam Chair. Happy to answer any questions or receive any comments.
Thank you so much, Mr. Smedberg. Are there any questions from the commission for Mr. Smedberg? Mr. Snyder.
There was some story today about the Metro Police not following up on criminal complaints. I wondered if anyone wanted to say anything about that.
Yeah, I don't have anything really detailed to say, David. You know, there's another piece to this puzzle. That was for a period of time prior to the chief taking over as chief, Chief Pavlik. And a lot of improvements and things have been done to address that issue specifically. And I think some of them may have been touched in the press reports, but you know, clearly things that had to be addressed. And you know, the chief has started to do that. You know, a couple, 2-3 years ago now.
Other questions? All right, seeing none, I'm gonna thank Mr. Smedberg, Chair Smedberg, and turn it over to Mr. Aguirre for a report from our WMATA committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we were able to give everybody a little bit of relief in June by scratching our June 30th WMATA meeting. But we will reconvene this fall to continue our discussions on the 2021 annual report, get an update from the 3% cap working group, as well as updates from our WMATA board members, and short and sweet tonight.
Fantastic, appreciate that. See no other questions, so we will move on from WMATA. Congratulate and thank again, Mr. Smedberg. And I am going to pull an audible and ask for our DRPT report next, hopefully with the indulgence of our VRE team, since that flash flood warning is probably also going off in Richmond. Director Mitchell, thank you so much for joining us. And let me turn it over to you.
Yeah, and thank you for indulging me. All those flash flood warnings prompted me to look at the weather radar, and there's some very bad storms hitting 95 in next hour, so I'm hoping to get an earlier start. But as indicated in the report, we did take our 6-year plan to the CTB this past month, and the total amount, I know that is cited in my written report, I believe, for transit, it's well over 600 million for the next fiscal year. But the most important item, as I mentioned before, was our TRIP program, which we did not bring for approval this month, but we do plan to bring in our July board meeting as well, which will incorporate some of the input that we received. And we're working through all of that input that we have received now. So we did have a meeting of our new Virginia Passenger Rail Authority this past week. We are in the process of assigning all of our agreements that were the DRPT entered into with CSX and Amtrak and VRE. The board is now authorized to assign all of those agreements over to the Passenger Rail Authority. Now that we have an executive director and a few staff members, we are continuing to flesh out the staff for that, though. Over the next few months, we've just hired an HR person. We're about to hire a chief of administration. We now have an HR person to help us hire more people. So we are, that's a big focus of ours right now, though, is not just the staffing, but also getting our policies and procedures in place and getting all of our projects up and running and mobilized as well. So we appreciate Congressman Byer's support for the project. It's on your mark. It's the project funding request for Long Bridge, as well as the other transit projects that were in the list, along with the Route 1 BRT. We are having a public meeting. I believe it's scheduled for July 26th on our Springfield to Quantico study as well. We had an elected officials briefing. I believe it's been 2 weeks ago now. Chairman McKay was involved in that. I think there may have been some others here as well that were on the call, just to give them an update of where we are. We're getting some preliminary results from some of our modeling of alternatives for that too. So we hope to bring that information to the public, preliminary information in later this month. So that concludes my remarks, or that I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions? Well, thank you for the championship of the TRIP program. And it was really exciting to watch part of that first official meeting of the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority. We have some old friends of NVTC serving on that authority now, and really exciting to see that realization of the transforming rail in Virginia spirit into a real authority with an executive director.
And it's very exciting to see.
Mr. Ryan, did you have a question? Okay, thank you, and safe travels. Be safe
Thank
on the
you.
road.
Thank you for letting me skedaddle. Thank you.
All right, well, we'll turn next then to our VRE update. We have one action item for consideration. So I'm going to invite Mr. Dalton to give his report, and then I'll turn to our operations board chair, Elizabeth Bennett Parker, to present the action item for our consideration. Mr. Dalton, welcome virtually.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good evening, Commission members and others. I'll be concise here. You do have the VRE CEO report and update memo in your packet. Just a couple of updates. VRE returned to a full schedule on Tuesday, June 1st. With the full schedule, we also implemented our seasonal schedule on select PM Fredericksburg line trains to primarily adjust for heat orders that occur during this season. System-wide average daily ridership, and this is unaudited, for June was approximately 2,300, and this is an increase of about 500 from the previous month. System-wide on-time performance, and again, this is unaudited for June, is likely to be in the low 80% level. Just as a note, the second week of June, we experienced several train delays throughout the entire week, primarily due to congestion at Washington Union Terminal and signal issues. The second largest contributor to train delays that same week were weather related as well. During the third and fourth week of June, total train delays did decrease, but we still experienced some congestion related issues and other random delays, but just not enough to get us back above our target, of course, of 90% or of achieving 90%. And so, Madam Chair, as promised, that's my concise update. Glad to take any questions if anybody has any.
Including the return to full service, an exciting milestone to mark for VRE.
Yes, ma'am.
Seeing none, Ms. Bennett Parker, would you like to tee up our action item?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have one VRE action item tonight. The commission has asked to approve resolution 2453, which would authorize the VRE CEO to submit on behalf of the commissions an application for the Longfont Station and Fourth Track project under the U.S. Department of Transportation, Rebuilding American Infrastructure with Sustainability and Equity Transportation Discretionary Grant Program, to make any necessary corrections to the project amount or descriptions in the application and execute all project funding agreements that may result from consideration of the project. This project is identified in the VRE CIP and System Plan 2040. It includes an expanded station with longer platforms that will support simultaneous boardings of 2 full-length trains from 2 tracks and the addition of a 4th track through the station. It will improve station access and customer convenience while improving service reliability. It was a unanimous vote by the VRE Operations Board, and Madam Chair, I'd move to approve the resolution.
Very much. Do we have a second?
Second.
All right, Mr. Walkinshaw, moved and seconded. A really important project. This is our busiest station in the VRE system, right, Mr. CEO? All right.
That is
There
correct.
is not any further discussion. I will call for a vote on the motion. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, Mr. Spedberg, Mr. Bell, how do you vote?
Aye.
Senator Bell, do we still have you with us?
Senator Bell is aye.
Thank you both so much. All right, that passes unanimously. And that brings us then to the Executive Director report. The stakes are raising.
This is hard. Do my best.
That one's, oh, wow.
Tornado.
This is we're going in.
Until 9:30.
Protect yourself from flying debris.
Sit next to the window.
Very succinctly, but it's very important that we actually welcome 2 new transit fellows to NVTC last month. Noma Ugu, I want to make sure I pronounce her last name correctly, has joined us from the University of Maryland. She's finished up her master's in civil engineering with focus on transportation policy. So she has joined us, and Marco Viola is a student at Virginia Tech doing his master's in urban and regional planning. So we're excited to have them join us for the summer to dive into all things NVTC. And this, we are very thankful to DRPT for funding this transit fellow program that's taken a break for a year. The bulk of our Nova Rides regional marketing campaign has wrapped up, but we've actually had a very successful campaign with over 700,000 times that folks been visiting our ads and doing things. And one thing I might say is that even though the campaign is over the website, which is novarides.org, and linked to a really awesome trip planning site that's powered by the Move It application will continue. So you need to go from point A to point B, novarides.org. We have lots of things going on during the summer. You'll hear about a little bit later, but because I want folks to realize that we do not have a meeting in August. So enjoy that time. We'll miss you dearly now that we've had a chance to see you in person.
Seems okay.
We'll likely have an executive committee meeting prior to the commission meeting. And I know we're going to be having some live committee meetings. As we go into the fall, legislative and policy, program advisory committee meetings will be scheduled. We have lots of activities coming, so stay tuned. We're keeping on this, we'll be asking all these great scheduling questions, and I really appreciate it. And so obviously financial reports are included in the materials as well. But that is it. I should go and shelter.
Yes.
So nice seeing everyone. Oh, Jesus.
Okay, I'm calling my family. Sorry. Okay, I need to call my family.
All right, well, we are officially adjourned and now. Downstairs, it might be a great place to hang out. Don't you, what is right here? Wow. Where do you mean the society for? I think that was great.
We just have on the side with us.